everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar. Andy, I was loving the dancing on the
There you
screens.
go.
That was an awesome way to start the presentation today. We're covering Pro Tools, Mixing Effects number 2, using EQ. And as most of you know, we have Andy Hagerman with us today, and we're always so happy to have Andy with us. As he is one of our master instructors and he writes a lot of the content, so you're in for a treat today. Those of you that are watching us on Zoom, we'll just quickly go through these housekeeping items. The session is being recorded so that we can play that back later. Your audio is muted. You are able to ask questions using the questions field. If you're watching us on social, give us a shout out. Let us know where you're watching us from. And you can ask questions in the social feeds as well. And I will be trying to monitor as many as possible. And so let's see. Oh, we have some in from the UK. Oh, we have some in from Japan, Andy. So right around the corner from you. So awesome. And again, we have Andy Hagerman, who's one of our Avid Master Instructors doing today's session. And we love Andy's session. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you and start monitoring the feeds.
Brilliant. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see here. All
right, and we're seeing it.
Great, fantastic. So this is the second in a series of 4 webinars that we're doing that kind of relate to different aspects of mixing. Now, mixing is deep waters, right? So there's no 4 webinars or even 400 webinars are going to teach you all the things and nuances about mixing, but hopefully we can get you thinking along certain lines and to show you some things inside of Pro Tools that's going to make using the key effects and techniques of traditional mixing more efficiently and more effectively. So today we're talking about EQ. Now, there are a number of different EQs out there, but think of EQ as being a series of little amplifiers, okay? And probably the simplest of the EQs is something like this. So this is what's called a graphic equalizer, okay? And forgive the primer. We're going to be talking about the basic nuts and bolts of EQ and defining the bits and bobs. Folks that are experienced are going to know this stuff already, and we'll move on beyond that and start to talk about Pro Tools stuff. But I want to make sure that we establish a common vocabulary first. So this is your graphic equalizer. And what these have is, so you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 bands, okay? 32, 64, and then so on and so forth. These are what are called fixed bands. And so if I was to move this 32 up and down, it would move 32 hertz up and down in amplitude. So if you want to, you can think of all of these little buttons here as being specific, small, targeted amplifiers. Okay. Now, graphic equalizers are great. They're very visual, right? So you could do a lot of really cool things with graphic equalizers. But the problem with graphic equalizers is these bands are fixed not only in position, but also in how wide these bands are. So there's another kind of EQ that I think it's safe to say that we use a bit more in production, and that is something like this. This is a parametric EQ, and it still has a number of bands, but these bands are variable, and we can do things with each of these bands that you couldn't do with a fixed band graphic EQ. And we're going to go through these real quickly. So if you take a look over here, this is the EQ7 band, and those 7 bands are right here. So you've got high pass filter, a low pass filter, these 2 up here, and then you've got low frequency, low mid frequencies, high mid frequencies, and high frequencies. So those are your 7 different bands. Each one of those bands can be turned on and off individually. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bands that are active now. The ones on the bottom, the high pass filter and the low pass filter, the in button is not on, so that band is turned off. That's one of the things that you can do with a parametric EQ that you can't do with a graphic equalizer. Now, the other thing you can do, and I'm just going to take a look at the mid frequency band for this example, is you can change where that band is frequency-wise within a certain range, right? So this is mid-frequencies, and you can see here as I change this frequency knob, this little yellow sphere moves along. So what I'm doing is I'm changing the center of that band, so you can move them, higher and lower in frequency. That's parameter number one. Everybody knows most frequency. That's an easy one. The next one is just as easy, and that's your gain. So once I move the frequency to where it is that I want to either boost or cut, then I can choose how much I'm going to boost and cut by adjusting the gain up and down. Then, and this is another one. Oops, let me go the other way. Whoops, going the wrong direction here. So take a look here, and you'll see here that there's kind of this little bell curve when I either gain or increase the gain or cut the gain. The width of that bell is a thing called Q. Now Q is the ratio of the band's width to the center of the frequency. So you can have a fairly high ratio, and that high ratio is going to give you a very narrow band. Okay, so in this particular case at the top, I'm boosting a very narrow frequency. Okay, so the center is right here, the yellow ball, and the width of that band, that boost, is very, very narrow because my Q is set that way. Now, I can also widen out the Q by moving the Q knob, in this case, counterclockwise, and what will happen is it will act a larger part of the sonic spectrum. Okay, so the Q is going to be a little bit wider, which is going to create a less, maybe less drastic, and certainly less surgical part of your sound. Okay, so again, we've got the frequency, which is the center of whatever it is you're going to change. Gain is how much you're going to change it. And then your Q is how wide is that change going to be applied. Okay? So that holds true for all of these different bands. So low mid, mid frequencies, and high mids. Now with the low frequencies and high frequencies, you have two options. You can either have it with a notch filter here, or you can have it be a shelf. So with the low and highs, you've got this cool little thing. So the bottom image here is with a notch, which is going to act just like any of the other bands. So I could cut or boost a specific range, and that's affected by the Q. Or I could set a shelf. Now here's where I think a detail that sometimes people miss, and we're going to go into this real quick. The shelf will take frequencies below the center and keep them low. So in other words, the Q doesn't operate in the same way. Okay, not the same way as it does if it was a notch. Now, I'm going to give you a warning. A lot of what I'm going to talk about is going to be subjective, because that's what it is. So as I say this out to the great wide internet, half of you will agree with me, half of you won't, and that's completely fine. Everybody's right. I'm just giving you kind of my view of how to use some of these things. And the low frequency is one of those places where it's worth giving it a quick talk. You'll see over here that with some, but not all EQs, when you increase the Q of a shelf, what you get is this interesting little compensating bump. So it cuts here, but it also bumps over here. Now, not all EQs act this way. This is called a resonant shelf. And what it allows you to do is it allows you to cut frequencies, pretty drastically, but it also, right by the point where the center of the band is, it's going to boost it. And I'm going to show you kind of an example that I think is traditional. It certainly is traditional for this type of stuff that I do. I use this a lot on bass, so that it cuts the frequencies that the kick drum's going to use, but it doesn't reduce the impact and the punch and the energy of the bass. So I'm going to go here into Pro Tools. Now, I've got a bass. I've got two EQs here. Okay, we're going to do an A-B comparison of these two guys. I've got the channel strip plugin, which is fantastic, and we've got the 7-band EQ, which is also fantastic, which you saw before. Here's a bass part without any of these. So I've got both of these two bypassed, and if you take a listen to them, you're going to hear the bass there, okay? So that bass is this little slappy poppy sound, okay? Now, what I want to do is I want to cut the low frequencies to make room for the drums, because if I've got a low frequencies in the kick drum and I got the same low frequencies in the bass, that's going to give me a muddy mix. Now, let me show this is right over here. If you take a look at the bottom part of the channel strip plugin, you're going to see I've got my low frequency set as a shelf, and you can see it's got a nice gentle curve down. It's useful, but not necessarily for this. So I'm going to go ahead and play my bass. And I'm going to solo it. And I'm going to real quickly unbypass this. Now, did it cut low frequencies? Yes, but it also kind of sucked all the joy out of the bass part, because it's only cutting and it's not compensating for the cut that it made. So that's a non-resonant shelf, and it's great. It's great for what it does. But I'm going to use this one. So here's what a resonant shelf looks like, and this is a pretty aggressive one, and it's right around the same area where both of the frequency centers are right around the same area. But listen to the difference here. So I'm gonna bypass this, so you're hearing without any EQ. Now I'm gonna bypass it. And I'm gonna bypass it again. Now, if anything, the bass got a little bit punchier, because what I'm doing is I've moved that resonant filter to a place where the bass really pops, and I'm cutting the frequencies below it. So it doesn't appear to be quieter, and at the same time, it's making room for the drums. So I'm going to do a A-B again, so to let you hear in place. So here's the original. Here's a non-resonant shelf. Here's a resonant shelf. So hopefully, even with the terrible audio that Zoom gives us sometimes, hopefully you can hear the difference and experiment on your own to see when to use these resonant low frequencies and high frequency shelves, and when not to. I don't find myself typically using a resonant filter for high frequencies. I generally like it to be a little bit more gradual. So if I'm going to use a high shelf, it's going to be something like this. So I'm going to keep the Q nice and wide. So something that is nice and gradual. Can you have a resonant high filter? Yeah, you sure can. And like I said, with mixing, there's no real wrong way to do anything. It's just important for you guys to understand the difference between these different creative tools. So sometimes you're going to want to use this resonant shelf. Sometimes you're not going to want to. Okay. All right. Going back to here. Great. Fantastic. In addition to shelves, you've got filters. Now, filters are worth their weight in gold. And again, I'm going to go subjective. What a lot of mixers do is they will tend to, yes, I'm in Japan. We have bonsai trees where you trim it away and you cut everything else that isn't important to the tree. That's kind of how I deal with filters. I use my filters to cut away all of the frequencies that aren't intrinsic to that sound, especially low frequencies. And very often I'll go through all of my tracks, or nearly all of my tracks, and any low frequencies that aren't important to that audio, I'll cut them, because low frequencies to my ear tend to accumulate. So putting on a high pass filter, which will let high frequencies pass, is something that I'm going to do quite a bit. And now this is simply a filter, so this does not have any kind of resonant peak. It's just a hard cut, and it's going to again cut all the frequencies underneath here. You can also, with the same controls in the EQ7, you can also have a notch. So here's your high pass and your low pass notches. So here's what it looks like with a high pass filter with the filter, and here's what you would use here with a notch. And notch is specifically to take a problem frequency out. Okay, so if you've got like some hum in the line, or if there's some specific problem that you need to just get rid of, this is your blowtorch, and you just get rid of that thing. Do I use these? Thankfully, I don't have to all that often, but if I've got a 60 cycle hum or a 50 cycle hum in the line, this is going to be that I can get rid of it. Okay. And let me real quickly show you how the filters look in different places. There's two different ways to work, and I'm giving you all sorts of subjective stuff. I've got here, I'm going to turn on my low filter, and you can see here as my filter goes on, I'm going to take that low frequency shelf off, and you can see here that I've got my frequency, and I can change the slope, which is kind of like a Q. It's not exactly the same, but it's kind of like a Q. And one thing that sometimes I like it and sometimes I don't about the EQ7 is that if I have, for example, a low shelf, it'll show me kind of a total curve of what that shelf and what that filter is doing together. Sometimes I like it, sometimes I don't. Another way that I could work is with the channel strip, and the channel strip gives you a different way of working. So you've got your high pass filter over here, you've got a low pass filter over here. I'll be honest with you, my ear absolutely adores these filters. It's very easy to work with, and one of the things I typically will like more about the channel strip is that you can see here that I can change my filter without visually disturbing the curve of my other bands. And again, it's a matter of complete personal preference. In the internet, half these people are going to go one way, half the people are going to go another. But this is two different ways to approach filtering and how it looks and how it feels to you as a musician and as an artist. Now, another thing that is completely subjective, but it is a great topic that people get into all kinds of intellectual discussions on, is do you EQ before your compressor or do you put it after your compressor? And there's a case to be made for both, but you have to understand from a signal flow perspective what the difference is. Now, when you have an EQ before the compressor, you are basically shaping the sound, and then you are applying a dynamic effects. Now, when you apply that dynamic effects, compressors will tend to color, especially if you aggressively compress, will tend to color a sound. So if you EQ something and it sounds perfect, and you put a compressor on after that, expect for the timbre to change, and you're going to have to make some other little tweaks in order to get back to your perfect sound. So the changes made to the EQ will sometimes not be heard as expected when you put the EQ or the compressor on afterwards, because the compressor is coloring the sound the way the compressor is supposed to do. And also, if you're, we said that an EQ is a series of amplifiers. Well, if you're amplifying, changing the levels of individual parts of the sound, you're changing the level of the total output of the sound, and that's going to affect how your compressor will work. So both of these things can happen. Now, it has a very long storied, respected tradition in music production, and typically speaking, it's very easy to get a nice, warm, harmonically sound when you put your EQ before the compressor. Okay, now you can go is to put the EQ after the compressor. So in other words, you get your levels with the compressor the way you want them to go. You get the punch, you get the attacks, and we'll talk about dynamic effects in the next seminar, but you get your compressor to do what you want your compressor to do. You get the levels the way you want them, and then you put the EQ afterwards. I'll be honest with you, if you want to have surgical control over how you sculpt your sound, you're going to find that it's going to drive you a little bit less crazy by putting the EQ after the compressor, because the EQ is not being affected by the coloring of the compressor. I tend to use this a little bit more when we're dealing with post-production or in anything that I want to be more transparent, more intelligible dialogue, vocals. Sometimes depends, right? There are no hard and fast rules, but there are pros and cons for both of these things, and those are two ways to go. Another again, subtractive way of working is additive versus subtractive EQ. Now, I'm going to jump right into the pit on this because there are a lot of discussions. But if you'll forgive my arrogance, I will say that a lot of the discussion is based upon technology that you're not using right now. Okay, so additive EQ is basically you take what you like and you boost the good stuff. Okay, as you boost things that you like, can you cause signals to clip? Yes, you can. Okay, and you're gonna, at the very least, you're gonna eat up some of your. That's one way to go. Subtractive EQ is, instead of boosting the good stuff, you cut away the bad stuff. Okay, you get to the same ultimate destination, but you get there from two different ways. Now, here's where the traditional position of subtractive EQ is better. Here's where it comes from. Is when you take this series of amplifiers, which is what an EQ essentially is, when you boost something on an analog circuit that's an amplifier, when you boost, you are going to introduce what's called nonlinearities, which is also called distortion. Now, that harmonic distortion could be exactly what you want, but it will color the sound when you boost frequencies, and the more you boost them, the more it's going to color the sound. That's why people will, instead of boosting what they like, which will color the sound, they cut what they don't like, which is not going to color the sound beyond the changes that they're making with the EQ. Now, we don't have amplifiers in plugins, so you could cause things to clip, of course. You can eat up your headrooms. Yes, you can do that. But because we're not dealing with physical amplifiers, with your normal EQ7 and your native plug-in EQs in the digital world, you're not going to get that same kind of behavior that you would normally get with an amp. So that's where the historic preference for subtractive EQ comes from, I think. That's my feeling. I will say that typically speaking, most mixing that comes to my desk, and most of the mixing that I do, is done primarily as subtractive EQ. But don't feel like you have to be constrained by that. It's not meant to be a chain that keeps you from being creative. But subtractive EQ is arguably more traditional, and it's arguably safer when it comes to your levels and clipping. Now, moving on, here's again my way of working, and I'm not the only one. What I do, and I mentioned this before, is I use low or high pass filters to clean up individual tracks, especially the low frequencies, because they tend to accumulate. I do that before my compressors. Okay, so I cut everything that isn't important before I add a compressor. Now, that will give me the signal in its most essential form, and that's also going to give me a signal that I reliably apply to the compressor. Then what I do is, after that, I put another EQ, and I can either do more subtractive EQ, or if I want to, I can boost. And the cool thing about doing additive EQ, if I have to, after the compressor, is the compressor's also already done his work. It's not going to work against me in that case. The other thing that I tend to do is, if you're going to boost things with additive EQing, it's normal to boost things with a wide Q. So in other words, you're bringing up the lows or you're bringing up the highs. You're not having a real surgical frequency that you bring up typically, right? But when you want to cut, for example, sibilance, or if there's a buzz or noise of some kind, that's, when you cut, I tend to cut with a more narrow Q. The other thing that I do, and this is more for you post guys, is don't forget, and I get this all the time with video. It drives me crazy. When a sound is further away from you, of course it's going to be quieter. Okay, so everybody knows that when something's moving away from you, you bring the volume down. That happens all the time. It's no big mystery. However, as an object moves away from you, or as its distance increases, more and more of the high frequency content of that sound is being lost. So putting a low pass filter and adjusting it along with volume is going to give you a more realistic sense of distance. So I will reduce the volume. I will also cut the high frequencies appropriately, not too much, but a little bit goes a long way to kind of give you that visceral sense of distance. Okay, now, before we go on any further, I want to show two real quick tricks here. One of them is this, sweeping the band. Okay, so here's, let's go over here. So I've got a little bit of dialogue over here. And so if I play this.
Well, it's peaches in the summertime.
Now, what your traditional workflows are, and I'll go ahead and unbypass this, and we'll make this normal because that's just crazy right there. There we go. Now, what a lot of people will do is if they want to find a frequency that's bad, they will tend to boost the frequency and then have a real narrow Q. And what they'll do is a thing called sweeping the frequency.
Well, it's peaches in the summertime.
Oops, wrong track. Let me go. There we go. That's a different EQ. Let's try that one more time. So take this, and there we go. Okay, great. So sweeping the frequency over here.
Well, it's peaches in the summertime and apples in the fall.
And what I'm looking for is whatever frequency is either pleasing me or bothering me. This is a sweeping the frequency, and people will just go,
well, it's peaches in the summertime and apples in the fall.
Searching and searching. Now, there are a boatload of problems with this. First of all, when you're boosting frequencies like this, is it possible that you're going to clip? Yes, which is going to make it sound different. The second thing is, as you are slowly moving this frequency around, your mind is getting accustomed to a bad sound. And any mixer will tell you that sweeping a frequency for too long will make you ear blind, right? And you forget what your original concept of the sound was. Here's a different way to do it. And it's called soloing the band, okay? And this is built into both the channel strip and the 7-band EQ. I'll show it in 7-band EQ first. So I'm going to play.
Well, it's peaches
and I'm going to hold down
in the
the Shift and Control
and apples
key.
In the fall.
And then I'm going to move
I can't have
this frequency. Now, what it did is it muted everything that isn't inside this area.
Made of golden twine.
Now, maybe that's where it sounds boxy to me. Can I change the cue?
Shady Grove, my little love.
And maybe that's where it sounds boxy. Great. That's what I want to cut.
Shady Grove, my little love. I'm
Perfect.
going to.
And it is. First of all, you'll never clip because you're soloing the band, unless you were clipping before. And it's also cognitively a lot easier to deal with a soloed band than a boosted band in the context of everything else. You can also do this in the channel strip. And it's a little bit different. I wish I could zoom in on it. Can't, but here's the little yellow dot right here, okay? Now, if I click the, it's this one. If I click the little speed icon right next to where I turn the band on and off, you'll see here, this will solo the band in exactly the same way, okay? The other way you could do it is hold down Shift and Control, and this is on Mac, so it's going to be Shift and Start on a Windows machine, and it'll do the same thing. So soloing the band, worth its weight in gold. Dawn, do I have 5 more minutes?
Yes, you do.
Outstanding. The other thing that I've got here, notice that I've got 2 different EQs. And let's say I've got on the 7-band, I'm doing this. And on the, let's say I'm just doing something different on the channel strip. Now, I would love to be able to see a aggregate result of both of these EQs together. And I could see that in the mix window. You could see over here that, and I'm going to open up both the EQs. If I go to my mix windows display and I choose EQ curve, you're going to see this little guy over here. And note, if I change, for example, if I put on a low pass filter, you'll see that it shows the total EQ of both of my EQs together, okay? And if I had 3 or 4, it would do the same thing. It's a fantastic feature. I'm not one of those that likes to mix with my eyes, but this is really, really helpful to let me know, what roles each one of my component EQs is playing. That's thing 2. Thing 3, I'm going to give you the last one. It's going to be super, super. I'm going to go back to my basic mix. Come on. All right. So I've got this song here, and I've got let's see, go ahead and play. Okay, so it's a song. It's got lows, it's got highs, and the whole 9 yards. There's a plugin that you might not know that you have. If you've got a subscription, or if you have the Pro Multiband Compressor, then you also have another really cool little plugin. So what I'm going to do, I've got my main sub, which is an aux track, and I'm going to go to Plugins, Multi-Channel. I'm going to go to Other. And if you've installed the Pro Multiband Compressor for the Dynamics, you also get this Pro Multiband Splitter. And this is the Swiss Army knife of working with different bands. It has 4 different bands, so low, low mid, high mids, and highs. That's what they're nominally called. I'm going to deactivate 3 and 4 just for the purposes of description. And what this does is it's going to output from the plugin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, I'm going to change my output to no output. I'm going to create for myself 2 new stereo auxes. I'm not going to name them because I am that kind of lazy. And they're down here, and I'm going to take a look at my input. So the input is going to be plugin, and anybody who watched the last webinar that I did with virtual instruments knows that some plugins can give you multiple outputs. So I'm going to go to Pro Multiband Splitter, and I'm going to go with low band, which is band number 1, and this is going to be my low sub. And then I'm going to go over here, and this is going to go to plugin, Pro Multiband Splitter. I'm going to go to low mid band, which is the second band. It's just what they call it. I'm going to call this high. Now, if I mute my highs, I can mix my lows and highs and even process my lows and highs differently. And this is a super easy way to work. So you can hear that the only thing coming out of here are my lows, and I could deal with them individually. And this is only dealing with the highs. And the great thing is inside this multiband splitter, it's got a nice little graph showing you what's going on, and you can dynamically change where you want to make that split. Again, you've got 4 different bands, but I use just 2 of those bands to allow me to process the low, the kick, and the bass and the low frequencies, give them a little bit of extra attention, and also then give some breadth and some life and some width to the higher frequencies. And though this isn't EQ, it is certainly EQ adjacent, right? And this is a fantastic little frequency tool that I don't think it gets quite enough play. And that is all I had for this event. And I guess, Dawn, we're ready for any kind of questions.
Yes, we are running a little over. So I did also post in some of the social feeds the email, so they can reach out to us via email if we don't get to the questions. One had come in. Can you show us the low compression filter that you had referenced?
The low compression filter. On the EQ or on the compressor?
On the EQ, sorry.
On the EQ. So basically, so here's you've got a high pass filter and a low pass filter. Now, I always get these backwards because I'm a simple animal. A high pass filter will cut the lows. So your high pass filter will basically cut your low frequencies. And I use that to cut out the basic rumble and the kinds of things that muddy up a mix. But I could cut off things that are just too brilliant. And so I could engage also my low pass filter, which lets low frequencies pass but cuts the high frequencies. And it's got a filter that it's essentially the opposite of the high pass filter, and this allows me to cut out anything that's just too brilliant. It also is a great way of doing what's called a futz. Now, a futz is a technique of getting audio to sound like it's coming out of a device, like a radio or a telephone or whatever. And radios, telephones have limited bandwidths, and using these low pass and high pass filters together is a great way to futz. And to get a specific timbre to emulate a playback device. I think that's what that person was asking. I hope it was.
Yes, it looks like you were spot on with that. We're getting a lot of shout outs on social, which is great. Everybody's loving your tips and can't wait to try them. And like I said, I know we're short on time, so let me go ahead and take the screen back so we can show everyone.
No, give me 4 more hours.
I know, but we need to show them your upcoming sessions, right? So let me go ahead and share that as well. Let me get this up here. So sorry, I'm taking it back from Andy.
No.
So for the next 2 weeks, we do have Media Composer coming up, and those are with Marianne. And she's also one of our Avid Master Instructors, so she'll be covering some Media Composer items. And then we're back with Andy on April 22nd. So mark your calendars. Those are at the earlier time as well, and we're looking to get all these posted. If you do have a question for Andy, please drop us the line at liveonlinelearning@avid.com, and I will make sure to get those over to him so we can follow up with everyone. So Andy, lots of love being shown to you across the board on all the social feeds. So everybody was so excited for your session and looking forward to your next session.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. See you next time.
Have a good evening, Andy, and everyone else have a good day or evening, depending on where you watched us from. So have a good one.
Oyasumi nasai to the person in Japan.